Hello, Mrs. Kingscote, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello? Are you hearing
Hello?
us? Hi, my name's Owen. I'm the committee clerk. Just checking that your audio and your video are working. So that's great.
It's very, very quiet.
Right. So are you able to hear what I'm saying?
That's better. That's better.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So if you could set yourself to mute, please, and then the chairman will call speakers forward by name at the appropriate moment, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Hello, Mr. Neshpur. Can you hear me?
I can't hear anything. I don't know if anyone else can.
No, nobody's speaking at the moment.
Okay.
We've got a few minutes to go.
I hear something from the meeting room, but I think they haven't come yet.
Yes. Are you able to hear me, Mr. Neshpur? Hello, Mr. Neshpur, could you please just let me know if you can hear me? Hopefully he's got...
I'm not sure who you're speaking to. It's very, very quiet.
Yes, it was speaking to one of our other guest who's joined us via Zoom, but I don't think he can hear. I don't think he can hear my audio. Yes, that's true. Sorry. Mr. Neshpur, can you hear this?
Yes.
Brilliant. We're having a few technical difficulties there, but glad to see you're able to join us. So we'll just start momentarily.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, members. It's just after 1 o'clock, so I'd like to start this meeting now if we could.
Recording in progress.
My name is Councillor Sam Kane from the Epping Forest District Council, and in lieu of the absent Councillor Sue Lissimore, as Vice Chair, I shall be conducting this meeting. So moving on, Owen, do we have any apologies and substitutions, please?
Apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Schmidt and I would imagine apologies from Councillor Crowe.
And of course, Councillor Lissimore.
Indeed.
Thank you. Any substitutions?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest from members? No, that's good. Let's move on. So the next item, item 4, is have your say. And here we'd normally listen to members of the public, but I understand all those who wish to speak today wish to speak on item 7, which is the consideration of objections. So unless members have any objection, I suggest we move those public speakers down to that item and move straight forward onto item 5. All happy? Jolly good. So item 5 is the minutes. We actually have 2 sets of minutes to consider. The first from the 24th of June. Do we have any comments, amendments? And are we agreed this is a fair record of the meeting of the 24th of June?
I'll move.
Second. Thank you. So those are okay. The next set we're looking at is from the 10th of August on page 13. Once again, any comments, amendments? Everybody happy?
That's fine.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So, item 6, which is the meat of our meeting, traffic regulation order update and application decision report. So let me just get where I need to be. So what I suggest we do here is we'll go district by district, and if we can quickly move through any rejections or deferrals. So if we start with Uttlesford, if I could ask the member to Uttlesford. Thank you.
Yes, we're okay with these, Chair. Thank you.
Very good. Any other members' comments? So we're agreeing to defer the first item and approve the next 3 items. Okay. Moving on to Colchester, and we don't have a representative from Colchester with us today, but we've got 2 items to reject, and oh, hang on, got some more, I think. The next page. No, that's it. So 2 items to reject and 4 to approve. All quiet. Jolly good. So can we take those as approved and rejected as noted in the minutes, in the agenda?
Okay.
Thank you very much. All agreed on there. So moving on, next page we've got Braintree. Do we have a representative from Braintree with us? Yes, we do. We have Councillor Van Dorpen.
Yes. Yes, Chairman. Yes, this is as we've discussed, and we're happy with that.
So you're happy with the deferral and the rejection initially?
Yes.
Jolly good. Do members have anything to comment on the schemes to be approved? All remarkably quiet, jolly good. So moving on, Harlow, again we don't have a representative from Harlow, so we're looking at, there's an interesting one here, there's 1 to approve with outside funding available, we like those. 2 for rejection. Quite a lot of schemes in there. Those obviously marked with the asterisk, the safety junction protection or our residential parking schemes, so they're pretty much safe. Anyone have any comments on the proposals for approval? Yes, sir.
Well, just for Harlow, these schemes has been discussed with Alistair Dunn, and they all been agreed as proposed.
All good to go. Splendid. So if members are happy with those, we can put those down as approved.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for the lateness of this, but we were expecting Councillor Crowe at this meeting. He had confirmed that he was expected to be here. Unfortunately, in his absence, with the absence also of a voting member from Braintree and a voting member, I see Councillor Lissimore not here, the quorum is 4 and we only have 3 voting members. Yeah, so this leaves us in somewhat of a bind as we can't proceed with any decision items.
Right. Well, we'll have to rewind and revert all of those decisions we just made because it would appear that we're not quorate. Is it worth adjourning for 20 minutes just to see if somebody turns up?
If you could, I'll contact Councillor Crowe if I can get through to him, see what the situation is and see where we can go from there. If we can reconvene, then we certainly will.
All right. Thank you. In which case, I adjourn this meeting for 20 minutes and let's see if we can find the missing member.
Public, we will now be quorate when we go back into session, so we can proceed. And just to let you know, so at the end of this, what we had a 20-minute break, we'll be able to start up again.
Yes, thank you. So, yes, let's do this again. Item 1, welcome introductions. My name is Councillor Sam Kang from the Epping Forest District Council, and in the absence of Councillor Sue Lissimore, our chairman, I shall be holding this meeting in my role as vice chair. I did actually miss something off last time, so it's quite fortunate. I do have a piece of business for any other business, so with your permission, I'd like to tack that onto the end of the agenda. When we've been through our agenda, I'll just raise an item other business. Thank you. So, item 2, apologies and substitutions. Owen, apologies.
Apologies from Councillor Lissimore, Councillor Schmidt, and Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, and no substitutions. Okay, do any of the members now present have declarations of interest? Nothing to declare. Excellent. So, next item, have your say, is for members of the public to speak on an item or a general matter. As discussed earlier, I've decided we'll move these items to item 7 because I understand all of the public speakers wish to speak on that particular item, so I thought it best to put it all together. So we'll move the public speakers down to item 7. Item 5 is minutes from previous meetings. We have 2 sets of minutes to consider. Councillor Crowe?
My apologies.
Welcome. So, yes, minutes from the 24th of June, which was held in Colchester. Does anybody have any comments? Yes, sir.
They're a true and correct record.
Thank you. All happy? Jolly good. And the second set of minutes we need to look at is from the 10th of August. Once again.
As before.
Thank you.
Record. Thank you.
All happy? Moving swiftly on. So we're now moving on to item 6, which is the TRO update. And we're going to do this by district. So we'll turn to Uttlesford first. We have 1 for deferral and 3 for approval.
That's fine, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from other members? In which case, those items are deferred and approved as documented. Moving on to Braintree. Do we have a representative? Yes, sir.
Yes, Chair. Yes, our 6 approvals and our 1 deferral are as we wish. Thank you.
And the rejection at the top?
As well.
Splendid, thank you. Any comments from members? Fine, we'll take those as documented. Moving on to Hollow.
There is one scheme I think you may want to amend what's on the agenda, which is the Millersdale scheme. Do you have a formal language on that there, or do you have that presented?
So basically, this scheme was originally designed as a resident parking scheme. We had a meeting with the local councillors recently, and that scheme may change into junction protection / extension of the WL lines.
So this is the scheme ending in
Millersdale.
988, yes?
Correct.
Thank you. So have officers got note of that amendment?
Sorry, if I could just get a repeat of that, please.
Let me just get to the list. So the Millersdale scheme, the proposal on there is resident parking area, and that will change to waiting restrictions, or based on the consultation.
That's great, thank you.
So with that slight amendment, is everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
All good? Splendid. Jolly good. So moving on to Colchester. All good. So we've got 2 rejections, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 approved with schemes for approval. I think we're all happy with that. Splendid. And moving through to tendering now.
Quite happy with those, Chairman. The ones approved and the ones deferred as well. Thank you.
Splendid. No comments from other members, so we'll take those as approved, as documented. Epping Forest, which is my patch, we've got, you will note, we've had a good tidy out, and we've rejected an awful lot of schemes now to clear down our list, which I'm sure you'll all be delighted to see a much shorter list. I don't think there's anything contentious on there. Amelia, did you want to add anything?
Thank you. Just that we've approved 12 schemes this year, 7 of which are bonus schemes, except for Broomstick Hall Road, Waltham Abbey, which has been deferred as it's going to be forming part of a wider review. And as Councillor Kane has said, we have kind of cleared our list and rejected quite a few outdated ones.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further comment? We'll take that as documented then, thank you. And now we're moving swiftly on to Uttlesford.
Yes. We're dealing with the schemes completed, or?
Schemes, I beg your pardon, we drifted in. It's the perils of... Yes, I do beg your pardon, you're quite right. You're quite right, thank you so much for that. Yes, so the schemes, completed schemes obviously are just there for noting, unless anybody has any particular comment to make on the operational schemes. Yes, sir.
I have one comment on the red route around Hatfield Forest. I've met with Shane, I can't remember his surname, but he's the officer responsible for this, and we've agreed all the proposed red routes, so they should in due course come through to here for approval.
Splendid. Jolly good. Yes, we found the red routing in our part of the forest has been beneficial. So, yeah. Contentious but beneficial. Right. So, right, we'll take all of those as noted then. Jolly good. And move on down to item 7, which is consideration of objections. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I'd like now to hear from members of the public who are registered to speak. So if we start off, if I may, with Mr. Richard Risdon, who is in favour of the single yellow line scheme. Wherever you can find a microphone, sir. Yes.
Chairman and committee members, I regret that it is necessary to take more of your time with Purley Way affairs. Here are some of the pointers to make the case for 1 hour single yellow line restriction. The NEP process asks only for objections to a scheme. There is no encouragement for those who are in support to write. I could have mounted a campaign with some very strong views in favour. The application has 37 supporters, 79% of households. They signed up willingly in July 2020. I do not believe that a new survey would produce a different result. Responses to the NEP advertisement produced some extraordinary statements and claims. There is no time to comment on all of them, but misstatements abound. Firstly, there has been no bullying. I had strong words with one resident, and I sent an immediate written apology in their situation, which was a serious family illness. The volume of commuter parking has indeed reduced a little under COVID conditions, but home working is unlikely to increase further, and despite the claims of several residents, there is still a substantial parking problem in Purley Way. Refuse vehicles do have significant problems, and road cars come from other streets and are sometimes parked in Purley Way for several days or even weeks on end. There is no drive sharing scheme. There's only one informal case of which I'm aware, and outrageous conjecture has been made about the need for paving over front gardens. Only 5 houses out of 48 have a single car parking spaces. 5 houses. 26 houses have 2 spaces, many suitable for 3 cars. 17 houses have 3 spaces, and even some with room for 4 cars. As far as I can see, the only challenge to the single line restriction that holds any water concerns finding space for care workers, but surely borrowing part of a neighbour's driveway will get over that. I submit that Harewood Hill problems are to be considered on their own merits and presumably under a separate application.
Can I ask you to wind up now, please?
Sorry?
Can I ask you to wind up now, please?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, you've got that was the 2-minute bell. You've still got a bit of time.
I do.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I do beg your pardon.
Yeah, I was counting on that, sir. Right. I will go to, in summary, I submit there's no hindrance to going ahead now. We have 37 households in favour of the scheme. NEP has put forward this to the Joint Committee, and the committee has approved. The objections are overstated, misguided, and in some cases downright misleading. All other roads in the vicinity, bar one, have controls on parking, and these appear to be working satisfactorily. Finally, my wife and I have been residents of Purley Way for almost 50 years, and I do know how this street has developed and has been misused. I am distressed even to think that this degradation might be continued in the absence of a 1-hour parking restriction, which we so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Risden.
Yep.
And next, I'd like to invite Mr. Jeff Sanders to speak.
thanks for the opportunity to address the meeting.
You could pop your microphone on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
is that working?
Lovely.
Right. Okay, just first of all, I think all the objections that have been submitted, I've read them through in detail. I think they're highly predictable and must have been seen by members of this committee on many occasions when considering applications elsewhere across the county. Any proposed scheme, I think, is unlikely to receive 100% support, and on the basis of just 10 objections from residents in Purley Way, I think there is more than sufficient support for the scheme to go ahead. Now, with regard to specific objections, is there or isn't there a parking problem in Purley Way? My view is obviously that there has been for years since the scheme was introduced in nearby roads. Interestingly, 6 objections have been submitted from residents in an adjacent road, the Harewood Hill, which is the only other road in the vicinity which does not have the 1-hour restriction. Now, I feel that those residents are basically saying that they object to the 1-hour restriction in Purley Way because it will have a knock-on effect and move the parking, the commuter parking, etc., into their road. So if there isn't a problem with commuter parking in Purley Way, I ask this question: why are the residents in Harewood Hill so concerned that the problem will shift into their road? That seems to me would confirm that there actually is a long-standing problem with commuter and other parking, long-term parking in Purley Way. Interestingly, one of the Harewood Hill residents actually says that they will support they would support the scheme if it was extended into their road. So my suggestion is, as far as those residents in that particular road are concerned, is the sooner they put in their own application for a 1-hour restriction, the better. The solution to their potential problem is not to turn down the restriction in Purley Way. Carers, tradesmen, other visitors. I've had recent experience this year of carers visiting a terminally ill member of my family in a road in Waltham Abbey with a 1-hour restriction. I can categorically say that there has never been any problem with those carers visiting that member of my family. Tradesmen and builders were nowadays they organise themselves. They ask you. I've had experience with British Gas. They ask you, is there a parking restriction in your road? You tell them, yes, there is. It's between 10 and 11 or whenever it is, and they work around it. The claims about bullying and dubious methods being employed, I totally reject. I think they're completely absurd. And I think they're a pretty desperate attempt to try and subvert the work that Richard did in putting forward this scheme. Okay, all right?
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move to our hybrid connection via Zoom. And I think we have a Michael Palmer on the line who wishes to oppose the single yellow line scheme.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just taking a look at our guest list. We don't have Michael Palmer in the Zoom waiting room, but we do have Mrs. Kingscote and Mr. Neshpor to speak.
Fine. In that case, in the order I've got them here, then Mr. Neshpor, please.
Hello. Thanks. I'll make it quick. I'm also a resident of the street. I've lived there for 8 years, which is not quite 50, but it's enough to be able to gauge the situation, I think, in terms of parking. I think that even before COVID, there wasn't really a problem with parking, and there were no obstructions to bid lorries. They come through regularly. They do not need to stop. There's no real problem finding parking, and in fact now with COVID there are no commuters at all, and there is empty space on the street. So I categorically disagree with the reasons for this action. And in terms of the restriction, even if there was a problem, which there isn't, the restriction is not workable because people today have more cars, so then there is space on their drive. Families have 2 cars. For example, my family has 2 cars. The house opposite has 3 cars because there's an adult child living there. This road, unlike other roads like Woodland Way, doesn't have such big front gardens or drives. So the strategy that worked in another road will not work here. And simply the problem is that there isn't space to park in the way that Mr. Easton suggests. So it feels that residents who don't have an option are having their arm twisted, and at the extreme end, would they have to give up their cars, or what would be the solution? So I think there's a problem with the plan. The policy is, it's a blanket policy, it's too blunt. It doesn't really target commuters only, it also causes a big problem for residents. And furthermore, this policy is not in line with the current best practice. I believe now that I believe now 1 hour restrictions are not even recommended to be set up. It should be residence parking or some other arrangement. So this feels like an anachronism, and it's not the best practice. So I think the whole process is like going towards the wrong aim. In answer to the to Mr. Easton's question about Harewood Hill or the other speakers, perhaps they're not worried about commuters because now there aren't any, but perhaps they're worried about these overflow cars of residents at Purley Way being on their road. Their road is about 3 times shorter, so for them it would be a much bigger problem if all the residents' cars from Purley Way move there. And indeed, there are no other streets now with a 1 hour without any restrictions, so there would be no place for them to go. So it makes sense that Harewood Hill residents are concerned. I think this policy shouldn't go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neshville. And if I could now invite Ms. Sue Kingscote to speak.
Hello, sorry, I wasn't expecting to speak, but I'm very happy to say my piece. I'm actually, me and my husband are very much against the scheme. For us personally, and I know that has not been a commuter parking problem. The people that park out front are actually other residents of this street. The people that park outside our house. For me, the issues that I'm particularly concerned about, and that I'd like to address, is the environmental issues of more cars being more front drives being paved over, which I think is a real shame. Part of the whole character of Save the Boys is that it's had green space, and I think that that's a real pity that more and more cars, more and more front gardens are going to be completely paved over. Also, the issue about carers, and I feel I can speak with some certainty on this because I've worked as a peripatetic teacher that did home visits, not in this area, in another area, and it was an area with parking restrictions, and it did indeed, sometimes I have to park quite a long way and take my disabled children, take my bag of toys for long distances, and that actually hinged on the time that I was able to spend with the young people working with. So that's a real concern for me. To be honest, personally, for me and my husband, it's not such a problem. We've only got 2 cars. We've got space for 2 cars on our drive. But I'm thinking about other, like more people that are going to have children, that have cars that are coming on. I just think, and the point about Woodland Way, I think that indeed there's going to be people visiting at that time, or people who've got more cars that can park outside their own house are going to be moving them to the other roads. So really those are my concerns. I'm sorry, it wasn't very prepared because I wasn't expecting to speak. I was just thinking I was going to listen. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So members, we've heard our speakers and their views, and there are numerous letters in the your packs. I trust you've had an opportunity to read through them and see both sides of the argument, as it were. So we now need to decide amongst ourselves what's the way forward. I've got somebody raising their hand at the back. You are, sir?
Apologies, Mr. Taylor also wish to speak.
I do beg your pardon. Please do. Thank you very much.
Sorry, if you could use the one just behind you, that would be perfect. Lovely, thank you.
Yes, my name's Mike Taylor.
Could you just switch your microphone on with the right-hand button? Lovely.
Yeah, my name's Mike Taylor. I live in Purley Way, and we have enough room on our driveway for 2 cars. But my son is hoping to pass his test soon, so he'll be wanting a car. If this goes ahead, we will have to pave over our driveway. Also, the commuter situation has not got worse. In fact, it's got better since lockdown. There are very few, if any, commuters parking in our road. As far as the accusations about bullying, I was the victim of it, so I know it went on. Admittedly, the protagonist did write to us and apologise, but I think that may have been because he realised he'd overstepped the mark. And no pressure has been put on other neighbours to change their mind from no to yes. And so your figures that's been presented to you are highly suspect. And I would ask, if possible, this situation occurred a few years back, and we all got through the post a voting slip, which we could then send off back to yourselves, and it was then counted. That, to me, would be a truly democratic way. Not there's some figures that have been concocted by the Pro campaign. So, in doing that, I think it'd be far more democratic. So that's what I'd like to ask the council to do. I personally don't want yellow lines outside my house. It lowers the value of the property, which has been pointed out by other members. And so, yes, I think that's about all. And yes, paving over the garden, I mentioned that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Okay, so as I was saying, it's now up to us to consider the arguments that have been presented and those that are in the letters and submissions in our pack. Feel free to ask questions of the officers if you feel it's necessary. But effectively, we've got 3 choices ahead of us. We can either proceed with the TRO as advertised, we can amend the TRO and that would require re-advertisement, or we can reject the TRO altogether. Those are our 3 choices. So does anybody have any comments they'd like to make? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. A question and a comment. The comment first. If the decision is to go ahead with yellow lines, can I suggest that we consider using 25mm primrose yellow, which is appropriate to conservation areas? They're much less garish than the 50mm day glow orange, which finds its way into a great many of these restricted areas. I live in a conservation area, and I came back from holiday once and found a very fat, brilliant orange line outside my front door. No problems with the restriction, but it certainly didn't do anything for the medieval appearance of the place. Now, I know Purley Way is not a medieval street, but it serves the same purpose, having a narrow and not terribly bright line. They don't have to be 2 inches wide in day glow orange. That's my first point. The second point is that there seems to be some conflict about the numbers here, because for restrictions to go ahead, we have to carry out a survey, and presumably that's been done. Can you confirm that that is the case? And yet the argument is that the figures are wrong, so that makes it a bit confusing to actually arrive at a judgment, but perhaps you can clarify that for me.
Surely, thank you. I'm sure one of the officers can pick this up for us.
Okay, as we've just done on the previous report, to consider TRO applications. For a weighting restriction, we'd ask for a petition to be made. I think that's the petition that people are talking about here. It's not a legal requirement, but it's something we ask for to say if it's got a chance of going through or not, or it's going to cause problems. In regard to the numbers, I mean, there's some difficulty with the numbers. I think on the petition, that shows some people. On the objections, some people have changed their mind and are now objecting to it. That's where the slight difference is. But I think overall, you're looking at, I think the quote was 10 objections for a house for properties with 42 properties on it. So what's that, about 25%? It's the numbers are to be considered, but at this point, it's the strength of the arguments that's more important than numbers for councillors to consider.
And the point about the colour of the shade of yellow?
I'm sure that if yellow lines went in, we could manage to put Primrose 25-inch in for you, 25 centimetre in for you.
Thank you, Chairman. I only refer to it. That's what they use in the Lake District.
Well, you live and learn. That's news to me. Thank you so much. Anybody else have any comment to make?
Could I just ask, Sam, I take it that what we're actually considering in terms of our alternatives are those at the bottom of page 29 on the agenda, 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4. They are the three options that are available to us at this moment in time. But, I mean, could we ask just to gain their experience what our officers would recommend on this? I'm not saying I'm going to be slavishly supporting what the officers say, but Richard's a pretty straightforward bloke. Let's ask what he feels would be a reasonable recommendation. I do realise that whilst I might have sympathy with 3.4, because you can always come back again if there's a mistake, that would be my preferred thing, but I wouldn't like to do that on my own. I much prefer to hear Richard.
Indeed. Richard.
Thank you, Councillor Talbot. We're at the stage in the process here where the committee has agreed to proceed with the yellow line, then it's agreed to proceed to consult over whether that's the right thing to do or not. I have a delegated power, if there are few or no objections, to proceed with the will of the committee, essentially. There's been a petition, it's got to the stage, the scheme has been designed, consultation has happened. This is unusual in the weight of objection, and therefore it's my job to consider whether this should, in the public interest, come back to committee, and I've decided that in this case there's sufficient weight of objection to the scheme that it should be heard in a public meeting, and we've heard from both sides today. Now, because it's fairly finely balanced, it may be a case for going back and doing another survey, as one of our consultees here has suggested. What I wouldn't do under my delegation is to implement a restriction that makes things worse for people who live in the area, where that's the basis of their objection. And I think there's one or two of those in here. And it may be that, as one or two of the objectors have suggested, we need to look at the wider area as well. So my decision might be to defer and to go back and gather yet more information over what might be required here. Having said that, the committee decided before, when it was finally balanced, to suggest that there is a need for some sort of regulation in the area. And all of the other roads around this, bar one or two, have restrictions in some means. And it's a fairly short walk to the rail station. And we might find, or we might not find, as things get slowly back to whatever the new normal is, that people do start to park here again. So there we are. I've hedged my bet a little bit in that, but I think probably my recommendation would be to do some more survey work and carry out, as somebody suggested, a more representative poll, just asking each household by delivered letter, maybe with a separate code on that they can go and mark their view one way or the other. However, that only asks the residents and it doesn't ask all road users. I don't think there's a particular objection there from any of the other all road users, bar the residents saying themselves that it might impede visitors, it might impede people who need to park outside the house. So they are slightly hedged bet, but
indeed,
I might err on the side of caution.
And just to reinforce what you're saying, of course, the process of the petition is to give us an indication as to how welcome any TRO might be. That indicated that it would be fairly welcome, but the result of the consultation tends to sway the other way. So there does seem to be some firm opposition to this, as well as some firm support. So I'd be interested to see what kind of further surveying could be done. In essence, we're talking about single yellow lines in operation for an hour. The further consultation or surveying I can only see as being a direct question to the householders on the street. I don't know what other members think. Is there any? Yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. I voiced concerns about the scheme at the last meeting, and having listened to the objectors today, when people are saying there isn't a problem, and the problem seems to be just other people parking in our street, that concerns me. If someone wants to park their car outside my house for 2 weeks while they go on holiday, I might not like it, but provided it's got this road fund licence and MOT, they've every right to. And I don't like this idea of other people shouldn't be parking here. It's a public highway. And I do feel, I'm in agreement with Richard, that I think further survey work to find out what the mood of the street is before a decision can be made whether to impose this any kind of restriction here. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Can I just, relatively unfamiliar with the area and with this, the background to this, but Harewood Hill comes up a lot in the responses. Is there any plan to introduce a TRO for Harewood Hill? It looks like some objectors would not object if there was one. Is that something that's being considered?
I don't believe there's been a request made for any TRO to be put in place for Harewood Hill.
No, so no formal request for that area, but it might be something that we could consider in a wider survey, if we were taking a wider view, perhaps.
Yes. Sorry.
Appreciating, Sam, that you're in the chair and it's your ward and it makes it very difficult for you. I'm reluctant to dive into somebody else's area and actually move anything concerning them. But I think under those circumstances and listening to Richard's helpful advice, I really do think the wise thing for us to do is to accept 3.3 in this, which says the committee could decide to alter the current proposals to take into account what's being said. That would be obviously the result of some further survey. As Richard said, we don't know, there's divided opinion. People are entitled to their personal views. This is, after all, a democracy. If there is that volume, I mean, there's 16, I think, actual letters in here that, believe it or not, I have flogged my way through. But they are there. So with reluctance in terms of interfering in somebody else's area, and I hope you'll forgive me for doing that, Sam, but I'd like to move that the committee accept recommendation 3.3.
Yep, that's fine. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Would you like to second that? Thank you. That's sorry, I can't see your table.
Yeah, seconded. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. And if I could add a slight caveat to that before we cast a vote, and that is to include Harewood Hill in any survey that's conducted, just to try and preempt any further trouble further down the line. So are we all in favour of that? We're all happy with that? Yes. Splendid. So moved. Lovely. Thank you very much. So, what's next? Oh, really exciting time. Numbers time. Finance report. I take it you'll be taking that, Richard?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Richard, just speaking to our two guests on Zoom, just to confirm that we've finished consideration of item 7, so do feel free to leave if you didn't want to stay for the rest of the meeting, but you're very welcome to stay if you wish to.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for letting us contribute. Thank you.
Right,
Over
thank
to
you,
Richard.
Thank you, Chair. If you skip through now to page 49 in your packs, we'll talk about finance briefly. Apologies for my colleague Lou Belgrove. It's half-term week and she's on leave, so you have me this time. If you'd like to have a look at the table, I'll take you through one or two things on here. I've highlighted a couple of cells. There's a spreadsheet that is behind this. We're keeping a close eye on the CEO's financing, and that will depend on us recruiting. We've got a continual recruitment drive at the moment, and there's a bit of a churn within the employment, but we're confident that we can continue to employ people. However, we just need to keep that under review because, of course, one and the other income depends on the number of people we have out patrolling. So we're keeping that under close review. Also, I've highlighted supplies and services, and we're confident this will outturn in the area there, which is under budget. However, we have budgeted to take some more things out of our surplus, our reserve this year, and we'll list those in the next report. We've got a couple of new EV CCTV cars and one or two other of the project things which would normally be listed under supplies and services there. But in this case, I've amended the table to suggest that we'll come out slightly under our budget in supplies and services. Again, we'll keep that well under review. Looking at the income side of things, penalty charges, we have issued at a level in this part of the year sufficient of those for me to be confident that we'll maintain our income budget and on that row. This is also supplemented, of course, by the new Park Safe Schools cameras that have recently come online, and we're looking to move those around the area, as some of them have had absolutely the desired effect, and in some cases have reduced the issue of PCNs by 63%. So they've been really good at doing exactly what we wanted them to. And we may move those to another location, or we might add more to that. And with the extra two CCTV cars that I mentioned there, both EVs, our first EVs have now been delivered as patrol cars. They will go to supplement our patrols in other areas. And we've been building the data-led services team around that work. The next area that I want to point out is around parking permits. So residential permit areas. We gave an extension of 4 months for the last year, so we've moved within the year where renewals happen this year. So we aren't profiled in the way that we normally used to be used to getting the income. Although we're very clear that we'll get the full year's income in. Visitor parking, we need to keep an eye on, and that seems to have changed from prior to the pandemic. But we will keep an eye on this budget moving forward as well. And it's one of the real areas we need to focus on. And the other real area we need to focus on is pay and display at the curbside, which, as we all know, during the pandemic, everybody stopped going out. We were advised to stay at home, and that budget was completely wiped out last year. And it's been supplemented by the government grant, the income subsidy, and we've had the last part of our income grant back into this fund for this year. But we do need to keep a close eye on that. As it's only just started to return to the levels that we would have normally experienced. Also on here, we need to keep an eye that our pricing at the roadside is at least in parity with the car parks. So in the local area, and most of the roadside parking in here is in the Epping Forest area, particularly Loughton High Road, Queens Road, Buckhurst Hill. We're aware that there might be some changes to the car park fees and charges in the Epping Forest car parks, and we want to mirror those as we go forward and keep parity anywhere else. So in the next meeting, I suspect we'll bring forward a pricing review and a strategy for the future to keep those in parity as well, and of course that will help with the income there. But really the tariff is in place to help the turnover and to help traders and to make people able to find a space to go in and pick things up in the local area, whereas really you really want people to go and park in the car park. And then the only other thing to point out is at the very bottom of the table there, at the start of the financial year, we budget to take 185,000 out of the reserve to pay for signs, lines, maintenance and other restrictions, and we've been doing that all the way through. but mostly this has been hidden by really successful years where we've been able to repay all of that within the financial year. This year we're nearly back up to that on our forecast, but not quite. So it results in us taking 29,000 out of the surplus, out of the reserve at the moment. But again, we'll keep a very close eye on that as things slowly start to recover and we change to this new normal, whatever that is. And we'll keep a very close eye on the finances as we go. That's me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, my first comments on that, if I may, is it's very good to hear the news about the school CCTV programme working and working well, and also welcome the addition of the EV vehicles, which ties in with my third comment, which is about our continually increasing reserves. We need to make some decisions fairly soon about expanding on the number of vehicles we've got on the streets and indeed expanding that school CCTV programme. We have the reserves there for good reason. Let's put it to good use. Members, any comments? Yes, Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to put Richard on the spot, and it's not. I'm not referring to any specific figures in here, but it's something that has occurred to me in recent weeks. As he will know, in the George Yard car park, where some of you may have parked, that is used to park the park safe vehicles, and I use it quite frequently. And every time I go there, either mid-morning or mid-afternoon, I see 3 or 4 cars parked there. Now, we're talking about a lot of money sitting there, and I just wonder if, and I don't need an answer now, but we should be aware, if we're talking about buying more cars, what are they actually doing? Are they earning their money? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. During the pandemic, we acquired a few extra cars. We used to take CEOs at more than one person per vehicle, and we dropped some off along the way. But during the pandemic, we decided it was probably the best plan to put one person per patrol car. And we bought another 4 or 5 vehicles to carry out patrols with. We've been buying diesel Ford Focuses off the forecourt predominantly, so we haven't had to enter into any long-term finance deal with these. We could sell them if we needed to, and when things improve, those will probably be the first ones to go, and we'll replace them with EVs, and the fleet will either grow or shrink in accordance with the number of vehicles and the type of capacity that we can put into them. The other thing is we have more than one shift per day in some places, and the ones that are out in the morning overlap with the ones that are out in the afternoon. So you might see some vehicles parked there, but at some times during the day they will all be out. And we operate them on a rota basis.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And from my own perspective, I was thinking much more in terms of the camera-equipped vehicles, particularly as we move to an increasing use of red routing, where they don't actually need officers on foot to issue tickets. Drive by in the camera car and it's done. So I think that's the direction that we are heading in. So just one thing to bear in mind for the future. Yes, sir.
Just a point of information, really, is that if I'm correct, the report is just to the end of August, because we're nearly at the end of October now. Is there any indications of the trend on some of the ones that you were concerned about, Richard?
Yes, I've received September's closing now, and it's very similar to this. So the trend continues at the moment. I suppose the thing that I'm most worried about is the weather. February, March time, if we suffer inclement weather, and we've had several good years now where we've been able to work throughout and no snow. That's the big thing that can impact upon the operation. But yes, September's and October's is nearly due. We're unbelievably nearly in November. So within a few days of the start of that, we'll have the close of period, what'll that be, 7? And we'll bring a report back to the next committee with details of that.
All right. Yes.
Richard, is there a time frame for moving to EV vehicles, or is that just a conversation that's being had at the moment?
It's dictated a lot by the following report, Future of NEP, as we've not wanted to dive in whole scale into new contract vehicles, which we probably would do. We were lucky in the fact that the Renault vehicles that we've got, we've a really good deal on 2 vehicles together, and they were able to deliver them early as well. So we've bought those from our surplus funds based on the decision that we took last time, aligning the finances last time, where we talked about procurement of more EVs. Yes, we want to move to EVs. It comes with a bit of an overhead of charging as well, and we're investing in some EV charging in Colchester for fleet and for public. So this will be part of that package as well. So all being well, we'll see in a moment about the letter from the county about the future of NEP. It's our aim to move across to a fully EV fleet as soon as we can. So the first ones to go will probably be the diesel Focuses that we can just send off to auction straight away, and then the other vehicles are up within about a year of us restarting. So that's the time we'll consider the bulk of the fleet.
No, very encouraging. Excellent. Anybody else have any more questions? Yes.
I have, as an aside, written to Richard, I think, twice on the fact that, you know what I'm going to talk about the fact that being in charge of streets and street parking, it seemed the appropriate place where eventually we're going to put car charging points. And I wondered whether, mind you, the county have cast envious eyes, haven't they? We see that in the next item. You make a big surplus like we have for whatever reason, and somebody else wants it. But while we had that money, a reasonable expenditure would have been, and I must be honest, colleagues, I was talking specifically about my area with the coastal resorts of Brightlingsea, Clacton, Walton, Frinton, Harwich, Lawford, Manningtree and so on, all with sea coast facing, all with people coming down in cars, and all I've suggested, without any authority on anybody's part, but dealing with climate change in my district as well, I've said that is there any way in which we could look to putting electric charging points in those roads that happen to end up on the seafront, so that holidaymakers in particular, quite apart from residents, holidaymakers in particular could find the welcome that they come there. There's a slow, when I say low cost, as against a very speedy charge, which is very expensive, that they could have a low cost charge while they're parking and spend their day on the beach with the family and come back and their car's charged. Now, Richard's kindly written to me a couple of times on it and gave me a number of links to other people, but typical of Richard, as he said on the other thing, a little bit of a guarded answer that neither said yes or no. I'm just mentioning it now because we're talking about finance. We have got the money, if we wanted to begin to set a small pattern. Electric cars are coming. I attended a meeting last week about hydrogen fuels, particularly for heavy goods vehicles and the like. You know, there are other things. There's alternative fuels that will at the moment go in existing cars. So there's a number of options, and I know people keep talking about this Betamax VHS competition, where at the end of the day one wins, but I think electric cars are going to be here, and we've got to face the inevitable that in the same way as Tendring District Council are currently looking at charging points in their car parks, and we have 40 off-street car parks, by the way, which is quite a number. Whilst they're looking at that, where it's their responsibility, dare I say, and are they the wrong words, is this the responsibility of NEEP to actually look at putting charging points in some of the roads for which we have responsibilities? Now, I just leave the question hanging, if you like, but it is something I seriously think we should look at. Thank you.
I can answer it in part. The initiative for on-street charging is something that's been looked at and analysed at county level with Essex and Essex Highways. There are numerous discussions about ducting across pavements or whether it's going to be street lamp charging points, but it's an ongoing conversation, and certainly Essex and Essex Highways are well aware of the push in that direction and the need for that push. We've all declared, either as district or at county level, indeed national level, a climate emergency. We're all looking at our carbon emissions. We're all looking at reducing those emissions wherever possible. And it's all part and parcel of the same thing. Obviously, NEP can only control what we have control over, and we will always defer in these instances to Essex Highways, unless I'm very much mistaken, Richard.
Yes, you're correct in that. And I understand that the county has recently appointed somebody to their Sustainable Transport Officer post, so no doubt we'll be hearing more of that in future. But I also say my project manager is an EV driver himself. You know Jason, he's been to some of these meetings, and we're looking to establish an EV project officer in that team at some point in the future. So we're trying to gather as much, and we've learned quite a lot from the work we've been doing in Colchester with the fleet, our own fleet, and some of the public charging. So we want to start to roll out some of the information that we've heard about. But yes, Chair is right that at the moment the responsibility for EV charging on the street remains with the county. All manner of other grants and things that we can look at, and what was OLEV, now OZEV, have slackened the rules around some of the grants as well. So there's quite a lot to be looked at, hence Project Officer to be looked for.
Excellent, thank you very much. Right, so shall we move on to the annual report, which I think is, again, back to you, Richard.
Yes, you'll be bored with me in a minute. The annual report, I presented the statistics last time, and if you recall, that was the unusually pixelated table, which we sent you a new copy of last time. The full published report is now available online. So these are published in quarters now, so normally you'd have to have waited until now to have received the annual report for the financial year that started 18 months ago. But of course we've produced them in quarters as we go, and indeed quarter one of the current year is already out and produced, and we're working on quarter two just now. So it's a little bit of a formality saying there it was, and we've published it. And the link is here, and also in the newsletter that I circulate, and I hope you all receive. There's a link in there, you can click on that and go and look through the entire suite of operational reports and annual reports. And keep an eye on that as committee as well, because that's where we publish some of our performance monitoring and things as well. So we try to make that as accessible as possible. And there we are. Commend that to you. Thank you.
Splendid, thank you, Richard. And I, for one, think it's an excellent idea to have the quarterly updates. It gives us a much more recent view of where we are, and long may it continue. So we'll take that as duly noted. Moving on then to the parking partnerships discussion, currently ongoing with Essex.
It's me again.
It's you again.
And I might bring in Lisbeth in a moment as well. There's four things here to have a think about when we come to it. We've been talking quite a long time with the county, by a long time I mean since before March this year, about what happens after the end of the current NEP agreement. Timely now that we come to a position where county has agreed that we should continue in something like the current form for the future, and the letter is attached in the pack. You can go and have a look at that. And the county's offer is for a further 5 years, starting again, so it'll be a new agreement, as we've already had our extension to the current one. Starting again, 5 years plus an extra 3 to be agreed one at a time. Probably part way through we'll have a look at the one after all the time. So up to 8 years of a new agreement. So that letter setting out the council's position is in the appendix there, as is the full cabinet decision report that was presented to the county on the 21st of September. And there's a link there, you can go and have a look at, and somewhere around that link probably the audio you're able to go and listen back to that if you want to. So now, boroughs and districts will be invited to rejoin a new agreement and take the benefit that we've got from the current joint committee and all the things we've been talking about today. We've also been looking for efficiencies in all of this, and we want to digitise and automate as much as we possibly can, and we'll come to some of the legislative changes a bit further through about why that might be the case. But the real guts of this is that The Joint Committee will be as is now, except for the fact that any surplus will be declared before the traffic regulation order making part of things. The TRO's part of it, traffic regulation orders part of it, will be budgeted, so it'll be finite, and that will be a share of any of the big surplus from the Joint Committee, and that will be limited to, I think, 300 and the figure is in there somewhere, 329k, I think it was, and the remainder of any surplus will be shared between NEP and the County Council. So it's a bit of a win to all of us. They're still able to direct the policy of the Joint Committee and to some degree, therefore, the operations. We're still able to direct where any future parking restrictions might go within the TRO part of it. And back for the County Council, they'll have a part of the surplus back for themselves to use on anything they see fit. And as part of those negotiations, I suggested that perhaps a good idea might be to have a county panel formed of the county portfolio holder and the chair of the two joint committees. And we could send other schemes back to that panel and have NEP granted more back from its surplus, or indeed on any of the other gradually widening out transport, environmental and other schemes beyond that. One of the things we do want to do is to carry forward 300,000 from the current reserve into the new operation and take with us the 100,000 cash flow that the County Council had given us to give us a £400,000 buffer to put out of any sort of question ever approaching any deficit ever again. So that would be a fund into which we could dip if, heaven forbid, something like a pandemic happened again, and it's all very, very fresh in our minds what happened in the last financial year and how we're still recovering, indeed, from that. So that's part of it, and the remainder of our surplus that we've currently got will be still there for the Joint Committee to spend, and although most of that's been allocated up to projects, there's around £700,000 is the balance after that 300 has been taken. So we're in a good position to move forward with a new agreement. I think it's absolutely the best option that we could possibly have come out with all round, really. And I don't know if I'll hand over to Liz now, whether you want to say anything else from the county's angle. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I'd first of all just like to thank Richard and other officers from NEP who've been involved, alongside officers from SEP, in actually working in a lot of meetings to talk through a lot of issues and hopefully get to a position where we have an agreement that is acceptable to everybody. I think our challenge, and I hate using sort of buzzwords, but our challenge at the beginning was to try and have a win-win-win scenario. So we wanted to end up with a proposal where there was a benefit for NEP and SEP, there was a benefit for all the individual members of NEP and SEP, and also benefit for the County Council. And I think we've got to that position. I just reiterate, as Richard said, in terms of the finances, it's really, really key that we don't put anybody at risk of having to pick up a financial deficit, which is why in the new proposal there is an agreement to make sure that we always maintain that level of deficit funding to minimise risk to all the member organisations, but also a way of allowing NEP and SEP to continue to control the TROs, to continue to control the day-to-day activities. And picking up on the comments from the member from tendering just now, again, the idea of this third fund to be used for strategic things such as electric charging points, understanding across the county those sort of strategic county-wide things. How can we pick those up and make sure there's a benefit for everybody there? So I think just really from me, a thanks to Richard and the other officers who were involved. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I was just going to highlight exactly that. That's one way that our current surplus can be redirected to do more strategic projects, such as the EV charging. There's also the opportunity for channeling funds from our reserve through this new mechanism into local highways panels, which would again reflect back into our own districts. So that's something else to bear in mind. It's just making the money that we have accrued over the years get out and do some positive work for the county and our own districts. So I think it's a good deal.
Well, I must admit, when I first read it through, I thought, oh, hello, sticky fingers here, we don't want this. But having read through it and thought about it, I think it's a good step forward. Members, any further comments? Yes, please.
I'm sorry to take your pardon back. I did actually write to Lee Scott about it, because one of the points I was making, and I think I said it at our last meeting, that this is called a partnership, but the partnership is with somebody at the centre, i.e. the responsible authority, the county council, meeting without any consultation with any of the constituent authorities, the 6 of us sitting round here, or in the South East group, who I understand were just as upset about this, on the basis of the fact, although this is a partnership, they'll make the decision, forward what we've got on our agenda today, for us to either contradict, support, or amend, or whatever. But it is so much more difficult to do that if the decision has already been made. In other words, if local authorities like ourselves had had the opportunity to input into what was going to be considered by the county at their October meeting, then that would have been very satisfactory. So it makes it much more difficult in that way. I mean, in another area, the changes, I know it's another, but an example is the changes to environment services. They've had 3 visioning events that the county have organised about that. 2 of them, the first 2 with officers, and the third one solely with members of authorities. Now, you know, that's an excellent consultation. It's helping to prepare where we're going. We've had nothing like that in terms of our parking services, either at NEAP or SEPP. I just think that's a great pity. And one of the reasons is, and once again speaking particularly as a coastal authority, where I know we try and have one system that meets everybody, but we're not all the same. You know, in the summer we're getting thousands of visitors every weekend, a lot of them looking for places to park. Mind you, they're filling our cafes and things like that, so it's good business. I'm not moaning, but we're not exactly the same as an inland authority, and we do have other needs. There are times, and the 2011-12 agreement included a clause, especially in the tendering agreement, that the NEAP would make use of our own enforcement people under certain circumstances to help out, to add the flow a little bit, or perhaps even pick up the awkward ones where you get a complaint about something at 10 o'clock in the night. Rather than send somebody, we might have somebody on the spot. But the problem has been, and I know Richard's going to grin, but NEAP have never agreed to use our staff for anything. Now, all I'm saying is we do have enforcement staff. They're there for our own parking facilities. As I say, we have plenty of them, and they do a good job there. But we wanted to offer, if you like, their services to fill up some of these things. There have been lots of complaints this year from Frinton, for instance, about wanting something more than just a car driving by on a circuit, looking at what's going on and disappearing, that it wants somebody on the ground to speak to people who are dangerously parking on corners or whatever. I won't go on too much, or so I should put everybody off, Chairman. But all I would say is my comment about that. I greatly regret the fact that the only discussion my council will have is when it talks about this at a cabinet meeting and looks at the Essex proposals, where if we'd had draft proposals beforehand and were able to comment, that might have made a more useful contribution from all of us representing our authorities sitting here, instead of having something de facto presented to us. But I hope it doesn't sound a bitchy comment, but I really do think we should have been consulted. We're all intelligent, hopefully intelligent human beings. Might well be we didn't have much to say, but it would have been a few things that the county could have considered, some of which they'd have taken on board and some of which they would have dismissed. I'm sure, were you consulted on it, Richard? You were, so there was some input. I guess that must have happened. Anyway, thanks for letting me rattle on.
That's all right, no problem. And it's a valid point. As you say, it is a partnership, and some collaboration could have been beneficial to the outcome. But I'm not sure of the timescales involved, and certainly our requirements would have been adequately presented by the officers, I'm sure. I've got every confidence in that. But yes, I take the point. It would have been useful to have some member input as well. Please, Luke.
Yes, thank you. I echo Councillor Talbot's concerns, actually. I was asked at Cabinet in Uttlesford, well, what's this new agreement? And I said, I'm very sorry, Chairman, I don't actually know. But it would seem to be something that comes out and then we sign up to it, which wasn't a very satisfactory answer. And that was made clear to me at the time. And I'm going to have to stand up in Cabinet again next month and basically say something rather similar. You know, this is something we can sign up to or not, but we don't actually get any inputs to it, which is one of the reasons why we had Brexit, I seem to recall. There was a table at which we had a seat but no influence, you know. Now, I think the NEPP appears to be efficient and competent, and it's reactive. It does its job. But on the other hand, I used to actually run the parking in Uttlesford in the earlier administration where we did it all ourselves, and that sort of worked as well after a fashion. It was much easier then. You know, I wouldn't particularly want to do it now. But that's always something that's lurking in the background. Why don't we do it ourselves? And there are very good reasons why we don't. But we certainly, I certainly don't feel as if I've been part of this process. There's going to be a take it or leave it at some stage in the not too distant future. And it will be based, the outcome will be based largely on the recommendations with a decision of our Cabinet, of which I'm the member responsible for parking via NEPP. So it would have been nice to take it back a bit earlier and to be more involved. And if it's timescales, well, you know, timescales are under their control in the sense that it depends on when you start a process as well as when you finish it. And we often end up saying, well, time's running out, but actually you should have started earlier. You know, we should have started earlier. That's always the answer to that. So I share Councillor Talbot's concerns on this, and so will my colleagues back at home, unfortunately. So I'll have to think carefully about my answers. Thank you.
Indeed. Councillor Van Dijk.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think from the point of view of Braintree, we, broadly speaking, are very pro NEP as a way to continue and as a partnership. But we do have one major issue or a suggestion, a proposal that the last surpluses, if you like, the one over and above the proposed £300,000 reserves, and then the £339,000 for additional TROs, shouldn't be just passed over to Essex County Council, but it should instead be divided between the members of NEP, who, I mean, that's where the money's come from, essentially, and you could find some way of doing it, either pro rata or divided by 6. These amounts then could be allocated to the local highways panels, so they will still be used for highway matters, which are relevant to our particular councils, and in addition, this would go some way towards offsetting the monies which were taken from the local highway panels, or certainly they were from ours, a few years ago by Essex County Council. So that's our position as things stand. Like others, we'd only ever seen this when the agenda came out, so that's all I had to say.
Well, thank you for that. And it's interesting you should say that, because certainly one of the areas that I honed in on was further funding for the local highways panel. But it's an interesting view to take it that way. Now, we're being asked to recommend to our own districts to accept the offer. Do we not have scope to make a counter-offer?
I'll quote one of my colleagues from another place. He said, you've done really well in Essex in setting up joint committees where you needn't have one, and invited in the districts and the boroughs to have their say on matters which they wouldn't otherwise have had their say. And to a greater degree, I had to agree with him, because parking on the roadside is an Essex County Council matter and not a district or borough matter at all. But what we've done here is to bring all of those things together into one place where we do all have a say. And you've got my email address, my phone number, so you can ring me up and talk about local issues if you so desire, and we can have that debate offline. But we've been rather successful in doing this, because let's not forget, when we started there was £1 million a year deficit across all of Essex, and we eradicated that within 3 years. And never in my wildest dreams, when I stood up and took the burden on my own shoulders to say, here's my idea and I think this thing will work, would we become a multi-award winning organisation which is greater than the sum of its parts, to have ended up in a situation here where after 11 years the county thinks it's a good idea that we should go on and have another 5 or maybe even 8 more after that. So it really is theirs to give away, and not ours to ask for, I suppose. But you can be absolutely assured that we've pressed the county's officers as far as we absolutely can, and I think we've come up with a really good deal in what we've got here.
Yeah, thank you for that, Richard. So, in essence, you're just enforcing the message that we are effectively a subordinate committee, subordinate to Essex Highways, and Essex Highways being subordinate to Essex County, and as you say, it is their call to make and ours to execute. Yeah, thank you. But I'm sure everybody's comments have been well minuted. Yes, sir.
I'm not 100% in agreement with that analysis, really, because it is quite correct. It is a county function, the enforcement of the highway. But they've opted and they've made a decision not to operate it themselves in-house or to direct award a contract outside. They have chosen this partnership route, and therefore we should operate as a partnership. So that's my only comment on that, and I think that's a bit disingenuous to say otherwise.
I take your point, and I do agree. I believe it would have been a better outcome for all parties if we had been involved as members in the discussion. That's my own belief too. Yes?
If I can just add very briefly. I do remember when NEPP got started, or the parking partnerships got started. I wasn't part of the process then, but I do recall at some point that there was a sum of money, and it's work from memory, which is fallible, but somewhere in the region of 150k was paid by the district council to the, because the partnership required it. Essentially, it was a one-off payment, you know, because you needed that sort of assistance, and presumably the other partners also made a contribution. So if there was a fund to be distributed, then the place where it should be distributed is back to the district councils, or at least the partners. The point's already been made, and it seemed to me very hard to produce an argument as to why it shouldn't be like that. It seems to be very hard. I mean, of course, Essex is in favour if they're getting a significant bonus from it, but as my colleague here points out, when it comes to highway schemes, it's very difficult to get highway schemes actually implemented. Depends where you are. If you're in Chelmsford, for example, it appears to be rather more easy. If we're in the Essex Highlands, the northwest Essex Highlands, and it's virtually impossible to get anything done there. On the other hand, if you came along with a bag of gold, as it were, and said, well, look, actually, you know, it would be really good if this scheme could be, here's some assistance, I think that would carry some weight. And that money could go back to that purpose. I don't see a good reason why it shouldn't. And that's a question which I shall be asked and will be expected to answer. And right now, I'm not able to answer it.
Indeed. I mean, Richard, can you expand at all on how the monies that are going across to Essex County, the 45 or whatever percentage it was, and how that is going to be dispersed and administered, and will it take into account the balance of the districts in the group?
Yes. I don't think there was a bit of a plan for it to begin with, but we've got to a point where I suggested we have a panel to decide these things, and that could be the chair of NET, chair of SEP, and the portfolio holder for the county, and between themselves they can agree anything that's put to them the best route for spending this money that we otherwise would just have sitting in reserves, and there's no reason for it to be sitting in reserves. We might as well make good use of it, as a number of us have said. And there's any number of ways that we could spend some money, I'm sure, but we're not talking about huge amounts here. We're talking about a few $100,000 a year, I suspect, for NEP and SEP combined. But there we are. That we have that the idea of a panel, and that's been written into the cabinet decision there, and that's the way that the money will be dispersed in future. If there's good ideas, then we should put it to that panel, and be the chairs of the two partnerships that will be present at the table. So I think that's a very good way forward.
So we could take it on ourselves as the joint committee to promote individual ideas through to that panel for submission and as ways of spending that cash. Yeah, that works for me, I think. Yeah, thank you. So, we're being asked to...
Could I make
this? Of course you may.
I don't quite know where we're going to go with this. My view is that I will want to consult my cabinet. In other words, although I know I'm their representative on this committee, this is so important, and the deadline date is not until March next year. We still do have time for us, if we choose to do so, to go back to our cabinets and say, this is the document prepared by Essex County Council, which at the next meeting of NEP we will be asked to accept. I'm only saying that because of what I'm leading on to. And therefore, you know, this is it. These are the advantages. You know, point out from our own knowledge of this committee where we think they're going, pick up the comments that people have made, like Richard and so on. But at this stage, just receive this document as something sent to us by the County Council, and as far as our minutes go, that I would like to see this committee agree to refer the document to their district or town or city councils.
I believe that is the
just leave it there and let's see what happens, and we can have the item on our next agenda. That's the next best thing we can do to force in a consultation. I hope I don't offend anybody by saying that.
Not at all, because
that's what
the recommendations on this particular item do include, it states to recommend their joining up to the new agreement at the earliest opportunity. That is our own district council. So yes, we have to, as members of this committee, go back to our district councils, present the arguments for and against, and make a recommendation to our individual councils, individual districts, and then it will be for probably cabinet in most cases to make that decision whether to continue on and sign up to the new agreement. So we're not being asked to accept the new agreement here and now. What we're being asked to do is take it under consideration, take it back to our districts, discuss it there, and we're being asked to recommend that to joining the new agreement. So this is what we're being asked for today. It's not a final decision, and yes, of course, it has to go back to the districts for final decision.
So we're receiving the document.
Exactly so.
We're taking it back to our authorities.
Exactly so.
Only for the minutes, I just want to know.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Sam.
No problem. So if there's no further comment anybody wants to make, can we accept those recommendations as detailed? Oh, beg your pardon.
Sorry, could I just ask a question with regard to the surplus that this panel that Richard's suggesting could utilise? Would it be ring-fenced, the surplus that's arisen from the NEP, would that be ring-fenced to North Essex and our authorities, or could potentially some of that be utilised in the SEP area?
It's Essex's money to do with as they choose. I would say that SEP's surplus is slightly larger than ours, so I think it's more their problem than ours that it was going to be used in another area. It is for the county to spend their money how they desire in accordance with Section 55, though. Yes.
Thank you.
And indeed, it would be up to us to present strong arguments and excellent suggestions. So can we take those recommendations as described All happy, jolly good. We're now moving on to an update on obstruction parking, which will be verbal and always fascinating.
Yes, there's no report for this one, as it's a verbal update. I'm scrolling through to get to the next item in good time. There's not an awful lot to report on this. There's probably more to report on some of the other legislative changes that are set to come in next to no time now. I've been talking a long time about moving traffic enforcement. That's the box junctions, band turns, weight restrictions, and some of the other things that are like parking, but moving restrictions. So the things in the red circles in the main. And obviously we're set up quite well to start to look at some of these things ourselves. As we've got school cameras, got Park Safe Car. Clearway is already a sort of moving traffic contravention in that you have to stop somebody to, anyway. So there's been a lot of work done with the government offices around moving traffic enforcement, and that's taken much more of their time up than perhaps the footway side of things has. And if you cast your mind back a couple of 3 meetings ago, I presented a draft policy for footway parking if this should come to pass. And around about the same time as that, the Transport Select Committee discussed the same matter, and there were proposals to Department for Transport to do something about footway parking. 1 or 2 of the options were to decriminalise it or to share with the police. That's the background to it. The Department for Transport put out a consultation and they came up with 3 options, of which there were only 2 really, because the first one was to make the traffic regulation order making an easier process. So the real 2 options were to just outright ban footway parking completely, so you couldn't park on the footway at all. Now imagine the consequences for that. Maybe unforeseen that there'd be much more carriageway parking, and there'd be much more of a job for us to do here. Their other option was to decriminalise and share that obstruction process that the police, they don't really have the resources to focus full time at the moment on doing that sort of thing. So could they share that with the local authority? And you have a policy for tackling obstructive parking and share that with the police. You could issue a penalty charge notice for causing obstruction. And I think that was our preferred response at that time. And that seems to be the leading response in the country. And I know that the last I heard, the Department for Transport were looking through 15,000 consultation responses with 23,000 individual lines of comments on it. And that's been being run in parallel with this moving traffic enforcement piece of legislation. I suspect they'll be legislated for at the same time, together with some other tidying up pieces that we need to get done around penalty charge notice descriptions, which have been a little bit strung up in some legislation where in other places such as London they've moved ahead rather, and they're not legislated for. So there's 3 pieces of legislation due to come out, and I suspect we shall see these early in the new year. So I'll keep you informed as to their progress through Parliament and the rest. I'm very certain that moving traffic enforcement will happen. That's the biggest piece, and I suspect very soon after we'll hear about the footways as well. There's a separate scheme in Scotland, for instance, that's been a bit of a pathfinder in this respect, and also these other tidying up pieces of legislation. So nothing to report concrete yet, but I suspect very soon we shall find out.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Yes?
I'll just ask a question. It sounds as though it's going in the right direction. I mean, the 2003 Decriminalisation Act that in fact gave counties the power to deal with this. One of the things that was always retained by the police were serious traffic offences in terms of parking. In other words, somebody parks on a corner, that wasn't an issue for us because we, the district and borough authorities, were had a contract, if you remember, with the county to do the work ourselves until it was taken back in-house. But at that time, something like that, you reported it to the police because it was a criminal offence. It wasn't a case of issuing a ticket. Now, as Richard said, in a number of areas, there are other examples, even yesterday on the television, about the police with those people blocking the road. They said the police couldn't move them because they didn't have the resources. That was how the television reported. Police are very constrained in what they can do, and they're short like everybody else. But does this mean that if the criminality is going to be removed from it and police are to have no part to play in parking offences, that would an offence, would, apart from being able to issue an FPN to somebody offending, would you also issue them with a summons? Is it something which would still be a criminal offence, even though the police aren't dealing with it? It needs to be quite clear. Is it still a criminal offence to park right on the corner of a main road where a bus can't get round? Let's make something up. Is it still a criminal offence? If it is, and you're passing the service to us to deal with in our parking area, is it still a criminal offence if the police aren't dealing with it? So we need to find that out, Rich. Thank you.
I don't believe it would still be a criminal offence. I think that is the purpose of the Act, is to decriminalise certain aspects of it, but Richard will confirm, I'm sure.
Yes, we're talking about footway parking here, first of all, as opposed to all obstruction. Obstruction on the carriageway will still lie with the police. The proposals were to share, so to decriminalise where... let's go back a stage. To decriminalise so that local authorities would also be able to deal with it, but where the police had issued an FPN as opposed to our PCN, then the FPN would take precedence. There is a precedent for that as well, because on a zebra crossing, I can issue a penalty charge, but it's an endorsable offence to stop on a zebra crossing. And if the police catch you for it, you'll get some points on your licence besides. And if we both issue a penalty or a fixed penalty for that, then the police one would take precedence. We all know that police resources are tremendously stretched at the moment, and I suspect this is one of a few things that are being considered. I mean, speeding is maybe another one that could come along, and that the general obstruction offence could be decriminalised as well. And that's one of the things that we pushed for previously, to make all obstructive parking, and that's quite difficult to have a description for, could be decriminalised and shared with the police. So if the police were there and saw it, it would still be criminal. And if the local authority were to deal with it, it would be decriminalised and you'd be able to issue a penalty. So shared. And I think the same is true of the moving traffic things as well. In that if a police constable were to stop you, they take you through the criminal route, and if you're caught by the local authority doing something you shouldn't, it would go through the decriminalised route, and one would trump the other if both were issued.
Lovely, thank you, Richard. Sounds enormously complicated. Right. Okay, thank you for that, Richard. So I'm now flying blind because my battery died, but we're on to forward plan 21-22, and I guess that's you, Richard. It'll be Owen.
Yes.
This is a novelty. I can take that one, Mr. Chairman. That being said, it's a great disappointment. I don't have anything to add there. It's just to go back to Richard. During an earlier item, you mentioned bringing a pricing strategy to the December meeting. So that's one addition for the December meeting. But apart from that, happy to take questions.
No questions forthcoming. So. Somebody help me out here. Am I now at the end of my agenda? I am. Jolly good. Now, I did have any other business I wanted to bring forward. I've lost all my notes, so I'll have to wing it. Basically, I was approached by our community safety officer in district, who's been in consultation with Essex Police about in reaction to the dreadful stabbings in Braintree and Southend that we've seen in recent weeks, and the police are looking to see if we can get some kind of a collaborative arrangement with enforcement officers at district, perhaps the NEP enforcement officers, which is why I'm bringing it up here, and police themselves, in raising the profile on the street for a few weeks, just to try and calm communities down. So I said that I would bring it to our meeting today to see if that's something that we could support. And then we can work with officers to see how we can make that happen. But in principle, is that something that we would be happy to see across our districts, just to try and raise effectively the number of uniforms that people are seeing on the street? Anybody happy with that? So I'll take this offline with you, and we'll move forward with that. Well, that being the case, thank you very much for your attention. We got there, even if half of it was sort of replay action. But thank you very much indeed, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you. Oh, absolutely, yes, indeed. Yes, so much a great improvement over our life.